Thanks, everybody. Really thrilled to be here today. I'm always excited to get to talk to fellow researchers. It's fun to be able to be in community. My name is Jennie Lewis. I lead customer insights at Airship, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about what the first 30 days on a mobile device looks like when you're interacting with a brand. The research that I do at Airship is primarily focused around the mobile device and how do we use it, how can brands get better at using it, and these are the key strategies that we recommend for those first 30 days. All right, let's dig in. Mobile is really more than a channel. It's something more than email or SMS. It's about how we live. And when you think about how we might interact with a brand, there's three destinations. There's physical locations, the website, and then the mobile device itself. And mobile is really the center of all of the experiences that we're having with brands today. In fact, about 61% of internet traffic was mobile in the last couple of years, and most of that time is spent on apps versus websites. Now, when we think about the first 30 days after you download an app, we're all customers in this case, right? And it's one of the fun things about the research is that we all get to live this every day. We call that the activation phase, the first 30 days. And there are really three key things that help brands be successful. First off, we'll talk about why they matter, how do they impact your business, and how do we implement them. Everything in the research and in our recommendations is really based around what we do is the mobile life cycle. And that's moving from acquisition through to loyalty. Acquisition are things like app store optimization, banner ads, and things that bring in customers to the brand. Activation is the first 30 days from app download through just plus 30 days. Engagement is that next phase beyond the 30 days. And really folks stay in that continuously. It is a loop. And finally, some customers move into a loyal phase, but that's a much smaller cohort of the audience. Success in that first 30 days in the activation phase is really about enabling high value actions towards the engagement phase. So if we set up customers to be successful in the activation phase, it actually has longer term impacts. And we use this framework to help with the measurement and how basically tracking progress through. There are a couple of key things that we'll talk about today, use cases that are really helpful. First off is registration and authentication, getting someone to sign in or sign up. Opt-in permissions, in this case, talking about push opt-in. And finally, starting to share interests and preferences. So why is this phase so important? Why do we focus on the first 30 days? Let's talk a bit about that and why it's important. First off, cost of acquisition is continuing to increase since the changeover to iOS 14, which was a couple of years back at this point. But really, we're seeing since that change and the variations of how brands are able to track devices, the cost of acquisition just continues to go up. There was global research done in 2020. We're really ranging anywhere between about $1 to over $5 as a baseline for cost of acquisition. And in this case, cost of acquisition is cost to get someone to actually download the app. It's completely variant by region. Actually, there's different likelihood to convert on ads in different regions, which has a big influence on the cost. And the most recent research is actually showing that cost is increasing beyond that. And while it varies by region, the thing that is consistent is that it's going up. Now, when you compare that to what we actually see behaviorally from customers when they come into the app, actually less than 10% of customers will open your app on day 30. So you've done a huge investment. You've spent likely $4 or $5 to acquire a customer, but they may not come back within that 30 days. So how do we actually maximize that investment? The trend is typically, just like a hockey stick in the first 30 days after install. A couple of visits back in the first week or so, and then just drops off over time. But when we look at high performers, that's actually because they're doing something during that first 30 days in the activation phase that's starting to initiate repeat traffic. And it's building an interaction pattern with the app to get them coming back more and more often. When you get opt-in enabled, it's actually starting to drive that traffic back. And the earlier we build that pattern, the more likely they are to have that success. It creates both the peaks at the times that the messaging is going out, but also we end at a higher rate than the average for the categories. So a couple of things that we'll talk about today. There's really 3 keys to how to improve and how to start to trend towards that high performer mark. What we found is that the brands that are doing these 3 things actually see improved activation rates. They see improved conversion. They also see higher volume of folks who've signed in and identified themselves within the first 30 days. And these 3 goals are really, again, set up to impact your first interactions with customers, but then also longer term success during engagement. So first off is identifying the customer. Identifying the customer means getting somebody to sign in or sign up, getting the opt-in. We want to get that push opt-in and start to gather preferences. And as we start to dive into this content, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A. We'll jump in and get those at the end. All right, so identify the customer. What happens if we do get a customer identified? So imagine you're interacting with a brand, maybe it's the first time you've ever interacted with them, and they ask you to sign in and you create an account. You really started to kind of build that relationship with a brand, or maybe it's a brand that you know already, you've shopped with them prior on their website, and you're just going to come in and actually use that existing login on an app. Any of those types of identification are really leading to higher rates in other areas. Here you see the day 30 activation rate, which is that 30 plus days after download. When you compare the identified users to anonymous users, there's really, honestly, there's no comparison, right? 4% of anonymous users are coming back and 17% of identified users are coming back. Again, our average is that 7-8%. So it's really much better to get somebody to actually sign in or sign up. If somebody is not signed up and they're remaining anonymous, it's more and more difficult to prove what the ROI is for that person. Your data exists in silos. You don't know Owen between the email and app and website. It might look like 3 different entities when you try to compare the results. So the more we can get that identification, the more that we see somebody, consistently and all their behavior across the channels, the more likely we are to be able to identify them and understand what it is that they need. The real kicker here is that in the research, what we've seen is that identified users are actually purchasing more frequently than anonymous users. And beyond that, what we're seeing is that high performers are actually also getting higher average order value when the user is identified compared to anonymous. So it really is, it seems to be something that is changing behavior beyond just the action of signing in. So what if brands are actually focusing on identifying and recognizing individuals in all the channels where they interact? What starts to happen? Now, if we start to identify the individual, we can start to build out a profile. So imagine you have a single person and they start interacting with a brand between app and web. If you don't have them identified and they're remaining anonymous, they continue to be split across those 2 destinations. And then as you start to add in channels, they become even less distinct. So you don't really know who they are and how they're interacting and what they want. But if you have somebody who is really identified across all of those channels, not only do you know what they want in each destination, you can start to orchestrate the content across all of these places. So if somebody's getting a push message, you could have similar content show up as a modal on web. Or if they're getting an email, you wouldn't duplicate it with a push. It really having a lot more nuance to the messaging. And I think we've all been there where we get the same message in a bunch of different channels from a brand, and it's it's not the best customer experience, right? We want something a little bit better. So getting that identification is really key. All right, next up, there are 4 different types of user identification that we see on mobile. We'll walk through each of them. So with each type, we're going to collect a little bit different variation of information. So some types may be a full account and some may be more just preference based. The first one is fully gated. You'll all be familiar with this. It really means that a login is required to be able to use the app. It's super common for banking, for IoT devices. I have a kid, so all the baby cameras and the night lights and sound machines, all of those tend to have an app, and you have to have an account to interact with them. We want to make sure it's easy to log in, that it's easy to create an account, and especially for our first-time users, explaining why the login is required upfront. So just to make it easy as possible and show the value. Partially gated is our next kind. So some content is available without a login, but you can't get everything without logging in. This is really becoming more common for multi-tier subscription apps. Think about like Calm or AllTrails. You can see part of the content and they allow you to use what might be possible if you have a full subscription, or they'll potentially show you a locked version of the content. I know Calm does that really well, that if you don't have the premium account, they have teaser content about what would be available if you had the premium account. So definitely that's becoming more common on the subscription space. Next up are trials. These are like a taste of premium features. So you might get 7 or 14 days with access to everything, but it's not always clear what would or would not be included if you don't renew. And finally, login not required. This happens a lot with airlines. It definitely is something that happens a lot for retailers. It also can be on news apps as well. It really is very common, but we're still able to start to get opt-in and also preferences about these users. All right, so getting the opt-in. First, we want to focus on getting the push opt-in because we need to really understand how we're going to get somebody to come back in and continue to come back and interact with the app. Right. When customers are opted in, they actually purchase more frequently. So opt-in permissions are directly tying to incremental sessions and then the incremental revenue because they're coming back to purchase more frequently. The devices, typically you're seeing about a 13% lift in purchase frequency, but top performers, I've seen it up as high as 30 and 50% lift. All right. Soft prompt is definitely the way to go for improving opt-in. Across all the apps that are running the onboarding campaigns, we're actually seeing that when apps run these onboarding campaigns, their opt-in rates can be 40% above their category average. So imagine that. I mean, it's a pretty huge jump just by doing something really simple like a soft prompt. What does a soft prompt mean? Just in case folks aren't familiar with the terminology, the first screenshot is what the soft prompt would look like, and then after that, somebody would see the operating system prompts. All right, so you can also you can do a single screen, but you can also do a multi-screen series. Those are becoming more trendy on the app side as well. So here's an example from an airline that was doing a multi-screen. So you would swipe through before you got to the end and actually signed up for push. Couple more considerations for the prompts. You want to think about who is the audience. Do we have the target information for the audience and access to that data in the app? What designs and screens can be optimized and tested? And what's the benefit to the customer? How are we explaining the benefit to the customer of opting in? And finally, what's the right time to ask? What's the context of the request? Very interestingly, if you do this type of prompt to opted out users, so folks who've been around for a while but don't necessarily want to, haven't signed up for push in the past, the conversion rate on that is pretty good. Typically about 14% of folks will opt in if you ask them a second time. Right. Gathering preferences. We've got the opt-in. Now we've got to start to gathering the preferences. We want to learn about frequency, what topics somebody wants to hear about, what other channels they might be connected to. So why are preferences so important? First we have to think about attention span. The average human attention span is only 47 seconds. So that's down, from about 2.5 minutes the last time that the APA did this study. So it continues to decrease. When you think about what does that look like in context of 24 hours within a day, we spend roughly about 5.5 hours a day on mobile. And an individual app session, so you opening up an app, news app or a banking app, typically it's about 1 to 2 minutes. So we have really a minute or less to get the attention of customers, understand what it is that they need to do, what job are they trying to complete within that session, and then actually help them complete that action that we want them to complete within a very, very short window. And the biggest way that I've seen in the research to influence that is looking at audience targeting, because it's going to improve your conversion rates. In the research, we found that when campaigns are using customer preferences to segment, the conversion rate increases significantly. The campaigns that are using that type of audience targeting, typically about 59% lift in purchase conversion. So nothing to sniff at. I mean, it does make a significant difference. And top performers, that's going up as high as 90%. Asking for preferences is something that really is a continuous process. It's not a one and done at the beginning. I think it's something that we want to really do over time. But there are still 3 commonalities in how we typically make those requests. First off is a preference center. So we've all seen these really traditional preference center. You pick topics or channels where you might want to get information and select and toggle on those. Becoming more and more common on the mobile side to have that both inside of the app and just on mobile web as well. Interest-based surveys. Sports teams probably do this, and sports news apps really probably do this the best. I mean, we've probably all been through this process of downloading a sports app. You select what type of play you want to hear about, what teams you're interested in, and maybe even you want to follow an individual player. There are really cool things happening on the device now where you can actually get live lock screen updates with scores on games or information about a specific athlete. And finally, then it's another thing where we're looking more about contextual data gathering. So these are little surveys, using location, anything that we can do to start to really slowly and incrementally gather the preferences that folks may come in and want to share with us during all of during all of their interactions on the device. All right, so a couple key takeaways here. Again, just a reminder, identifying the customer, that's going to get folks purchasing more frequently than anonymous users. We want to get the opt-in. When customers are opted in, they purchase more frequently. And finally, gathering those preferences, we want to enable the audience targeting, and then that's going to also result in higher conversion rates. Awesome. So I wanted to save time for Q&A. And I'm just going to stop share here in case there's a panel we need to look at. Yeah.
I don't see any in the Q&A, but I have some questions.
Yeah.
I was just kind of curious to kind of ask you kind of back at the beginning. You mentioned the cost of acquisition per kind of download. And you said that it's increased over time, probably since like 2020, kind of around the time of the pandemic to now. What is causing the rise in cost per download? Is it just so many more apps in field, and there's just far more competition, or is it the average user becoming more and more in tune with the online landscape and kind of brushing things off?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a couple of different key pieces of it. First off is the likelihood to convert from an ad by region is extremely variable. Interestingly, like different regions, some regions, the folks will convert like 30% from an ad to download the app, and then others, like in the US, I think it's like 1%. I mean, it's very, very small. So that's one piece. iOS 14, which is a couple years back, that changed it changed like the ad tracking functionality on the devices. And so because of that, places that you were able to kind of follow somebody through, you can't do anymore. I'm not an ad rev expert, but that's the high level. And because of that, the amount of spend on ads is far more. Beyond that, even additionally on that, the cost of advertising on social media. So your Meta, X, Snap, TikTok, and so on, paying influencers, all of those costs, just actually like media space, the cost of those has increased. So yeah, I think it's a lot of factors, but what we're seeing, and when you look at the survey data from actual, like from marketers, from B2C folks, they're just saying it keeps going up.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we have a question from the
Mhm.
chat. Are there any activities that apps offer that are actually affect the participation rate negatively, like requiring a credit card for a trial, etc.?
Oh, so Julie, I'll have to grab the link to send you. A friend of mine is actually a researcher in this space about specifically about subscriptions, that you might find really interesting because they get into a lot of that fun stuff. But at a high level, it really is more about how are you communicating the value of whatever it is you're asking somebody to do. So that we talked a lot about in the slides about identifying, so doing a sign in, right? If you're explaining why that's important, the likelihood of somebody to convert is very high. If you're not explaining and you're just popping up one of the operating system prompts, or if you do something that's very interruptive, I think have you ever been to, like, just on a mobile website, you go there and the second you get onto it, you start getting like modal before you can even look at anything. And those type of interruptive experiences actually have negative impact. It's not so much about the ask or what you're requesting that somebody do. It's about how it hits from an interaction perspective. So it's timing, context. When I'm talking to customers, I really want to recommend that folks, they give people the opportunity to interact with the website or the app before making an ask. Unless you're like a bank, right? Like if you're a bank, you probably have to have somebody log in before you can do much else. But if you're a commerce, if you're news, sports, all of those let people have a taste, let people understand what they're walking into before you start bombarding with requests.
Okay. And I actually have another question kind of to piggyback off of that. In terms of industry, do you
Mhm.
see, is there any industries that outperform others when it comes to the kind of like opt-ins,
Mhm.
like the push notification or the opt-in services that are provided? So like for example, like you see more in tech than the outdoor industry or than in automotive sales or stuff like that.
News is one that's really interesting. Typically what we see there are sort of super fans where more is more. So as an example, those live the live updates for especially for sports news, people who are getting those live activities, and if you haven't seen that, on it's called live activities on iOS, and then there's Airship built some Android technology to do a similar functionality, so you can get it on an Android lock screen now as well. But these are like the score updates from sports news venues. That actually increases the amount of times folks come back in to the app by like 300+%. So the more we're getting information to them, the more updates they're seeing. It drives this massive continuous behavior, which is huge for ad revenue. Um, on the flip side, you've got like your commerce apps, it's a lot more delicate how frequently you're sending requests, right? Because commerce apps, like, are you giving something informational, or are you just saying buy something again, right? So it's like what value is in sending a push like that, and that's really where the segmentation comes down. But I'd say the really high frequency stuff that I see is in news, sports are really big ones. The actual opt-in rates themselves, that again it's really variable by the category, but I'd say common across all categories is that you have a pretty big distinction between average and high performers.
Okay. I'm just gonna give it a little bit more time, see if anybody's typing away. Um,
Awesome. Yeah, and while you're doing that, I'll just pop up my LinkedIn
yeah, absolutely.
here in case folks want to connect. I'm always posting research about mobile stuff, so really, happy to talk and share more if you're interested in the space. We're moving away at all this stuff here at the airship side, and definitely love to share the research. Awesome. And I think I lost your audio.
Sorry. Muting and unmuting is a problem for me. Well, I think that should wrap it up here. Just wanted to say thank you for your presentation and your time. I found it very interesting, especially somebody who uses his phone every day,
Mhm.
and kind of seeing some of the under the hood stuff about it. So
Awesome.
just want to say thank you again.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. Great to see you all.